Welcome to Bigger Than the Game with Jeremy Dove and Jose Ruiz. Jose, what's going on, man?
Jeremy Dove, what's going on, my brother? How you doing, man?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good, man. And the opening's a little
Oh,
bit
before we get
different.
started, hold on. Before we get started, it's a big day today and bigger than the game, land. Got to shout out my brother, man. Happy birthday, Jeremy Dove,
I
man.
appreciate that. I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, we're
Yeah, no doubt, no
we're
doubt.
we're recording this on June 29th, so that's my date of birth. So for all you people into all those signs, I'm a Cancer, so Cancer's right on. So
Are you
gotta.
big into that, like astronomy stuff?
I'm not.
I'm not. I'm not.
But I'm around people like it seems like every job I'm at, like, and I bump into people who really are, and
Yeah,
it's I can't lie, it's like I don't really take it serious, but it's fun to talk about it, like hear them talk about it, and I
it's
go along
interesting
with
for
it.
sure.
Yeah, yeah.
It's definitely interesting. I've had a friend of mine. I know we're going like super off
No, no,
topic,
no.
but
Go ahead.
I had a friend of mine. She asked me to do like I don't know what it's called, but you put in like your information or whatever, and it gives you all your like matches or whatever you call it. I don't know what you're calling it, but it's like a whole thing. It's like a Virgo sun. I'm a Virgo. It's like Virgo
Okay.
sun with like Pisces moon. It's
Mm-hmm.
like deep. It was like deep. It was a little too deep for
Yeah.
me. And
It's like things that like the other signs that you're compatible with, ones that you're
right,
not,
right.
and all these things, and like it's interesting. It is like so when I hear people talk about it, I'm not just like whatever. Like I'll go into it and like talk with them. Some people
Yeah,
take it real serious. Like
yeah.
that's one of the first questions. When's your birthday? Oh, you're a this. Like I don't
Like they
know.
know right off the
Yeah,
top. Like I know like five signs.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
that's it.
They know, and they're like, oh, I've had a bad history with like Leos, so I don't know about you. And I'm just like, you really can't. No one person's the same, so I'm like, you can't base
Yeah.
that off of, but people do it, and hey, I hear them, but so I always like to
I'm
do that.
I say this, like I think I'm a spot on Virgo though. Like I'm very like neat. That's like one of the traits I
Mm-hmm.
think for being a Virgo. I'm very I'm very organized. Um I'm good with the ladies, that's what they say.
Oh, really?
No, I'm joking. But whatever. Some of the things I've heard about like Virgo
What's
signs, like
funny is I'm not really I don't like totally believe in it, but for cancers, I think I'm pretty dead on for a cancer too. That's why it's like
yeah, we don't believe in it, but we believe in it when it comes to us.
it's
Yeah.
pretty accurate to us, but I don't believe in like letting that affect life choices. Like, that's where it's like
Right, right, right.
where people are like, I can't really date like this sign. I heard a lot of people say that I can't date if you're this, I can't date you, and I'm like, that
Yeah,
I can't
I'm
do
not
that.
there. I'm not
Yeah,
there with it.
I can't do that. But no, I appreciate that, man. Thank you, and it's
No, of
blessed to have
course.
another year. And that's how much we love doing this show. Don't matter birthdays, holidays, whatever. Um,
Yeah.
it truly is one of the most fun things. And people may say that's crazy, but when it's your passion, you love it. This is not the first time on my birthday I've recorded a podcast. Like I love doing it. So, and I love doing this show.
Yeah.
So I'm glad to do it, man. So thank you. And I changed up the opening a little bit because it's a little. Usually, you try to be a little more hype, but
Yeah.
this one it's a little bit different, but it's special to us and special to a lot of people. And I think like a lot of people don't really know the impact to this day that this person has had on sports and how in that short of a time this person has left a legacy that we still feel today. But on this past weekend, June 25th, was the 30th anniversary of the late great Jerome Brown's tragic death. So for those who don't know, great defensive tackle who played at the University of Miami. He played for the Eagles, Pro Bowl D tackle, and died tragically June 25th, 92. And Jose and I wanted to talk about Jerome Brown, his legacy, what kind of player he was, what kind of person he was, and the impact that death had on a lot of places, on the NFL, on this franchise, on the city of Philadelphia, and beyond that. So, this was one that we really wanted to do.
Yeah, for sure. And probably the biggest gut punch I've ever felt in sports. Like, you know what I mean? Like I've obviously like I know we both have like we've had, close people pass on us and stuff like that. But I mean like somebody sports related for me, it's to this day, like, doing the show, we're looking some stuff up and all that and just and we're going to get into all of this, but like when Reggie White announced it, I still like get chills. You know what I mean? Just rewatching that, and it's just like I don't know if I've ever experienced that as a fan because at that point, this is '91. I'm I'm
Or
I'm like a 92,
92.
92. This is '92, and I'm a young like you know how you're young like you're all about sports like you know what I
Hmm.
mean like right now like we're obviously older adults and we got families, jobs, like stuff like that we have to like deal
Yeah.
with, daily. But then it's all about sports, no responsibilities, nothing like that. And when that, I remember, I would never forget when that happened. I was just like blown away. And again, to this day, like you mentioned, it still felt, you know, when the Eagles have a defensive lineman, and if it's a pretty good defensive lineman, we start comparing them, and the first name that comes up is Reggie White, and then the next one is Jerome Brown. And it was just a very sad day for Philadelphia's sports, but it's just sports in general.
It's something that it rocked a lot of people, and it rocked. And there's players. People will say that the late great Reggie White after that happened wasn't the same. You hear Clyde Simmons, Seth Joyner, who were really like some of his closest friends on the team, and that everything changed for them, and not just as football, but in life. Like how they looked at it, like that was a brother who they lost. Mike Golick,
Mike Golick, yeah, I was
you
about to say
know,
that, yeah.
how devastated he was. You can go online and see the press conference that he had right after, and how rocked he was when
I
he
mean,
found out.
you can even see it recently when he was doing the Mike and Mike, in the morning when that conversation came up, he would get choked up. And this is 20 something years later, so it was a devastating loss.
And Jose, we'll talk about the player and how great he was on the field, but a lot
Hmm.
of it was the personality, the
Yeah,
personality that he had. Where if you look at you know the Philadelphia Eagles and the Buddy Ryan, there's so many characters, such a colorful team, loud, brash, cocky, and you could say like they took on the identity of Buddy. But honestly, the person who was the heart and soul, who they took on the most, it was number 99. It was
yeah,
Jerome Brown, who that team took on that identity and that, devil may care, reckless abandon, loud, brash, funny, but going to like border that line of like, ooh, kind of offensive, but you would crack
yeah.
up anyway. This team really took on that identity of Jerome Brown.
Right, and it carried off the field and off the on the field for sure. And that late '80s, early '90s Eagles team, especially defensively, um, were known as like trying to like bully people. You know what I mean? Like bully teams and bully offenses, which they did a lot of weeks. And again, like I'm not saying Jerome Brown's a bully, but it was just more that mentality, that aggressive attack mode, every single play mentality that he played with, right? Like that reckless abandon you always hear about. People talking about players, and like he had that, like that motor, like we all those attributes that we hear today. He definitely had all of that, and it started right in the middle. And again, like when you have that great of a player in the middle, and you have that great of a player in Reggie White on the outside, it was just a scary defense to go up against. And but again, I agree with that. I think they took on his personality, that brash, bravado, like really cocky, like you mentioned, like in your face. They're going to talk a lot of junk, but back it up. Like that defense definitely took on that attitude for sure, 100%.
And this is just me talking, and I'm not going to say it's just one factor or one player. But if you look at the time that Jerome emerged from his time at the U in Miami in the mid '80s to then the late '80s coming to Philly and into the early '90s, you look at it. sports and hip hop at that time, it wasn't like now it's an automatic connection. Now
Yeah,
it's like, yeah,
yeah.
boom. But at that time it wasn't. And
No,
there's some factors, you know, you look at Georgetown and the Big East, and if you've listened to our podcast, check those archives.
check them.
You know, you've heard us talk about that. They had a play on that. You know, you can even see it with, you know, Isaiah Thomas and the Bad Boys, and then those LA Raiders and UNLV. But
Yep.
Jerome Brown as a player to me was a guy who kind of helped bridge that gap for hip hop and sports, in my opinion. Like Jerome kind of had that hip hop attitude and was openly, you know, young and showing that at a time when it really wasn't that popular. It still was kind of like taboo to do.
Right, and he was built like out of like that Charles Barkley mode, like
Mm-hmm.
that at that point in time, like you had to be really careful how you spoke in front of the media, and players were really, excuse me, like tight to the vest, like close to the vest, but like what they would say to the media. And Jerome Brown was not. You didn't have to worry about that with Jerome, and he was going to tell you how he felt, no matter where he was in a press conference, an interview, like. We're going to bring up a few, those instances where it's like you needed a quote, you went to Jerome Brown, and he wasn't going to disappoint. So, yeah, I appreciate athletes like that, and I know we always want to. It's funny because, like, as fans and definitely media, they always talk about like we want players to be like open and honest, until the player's open and honest,
Exactly.
and you know what I mean, and then then it's too much, and he's in your face, and he has an attitude. So, again, like we were mentioning, like. There was an aggressive type of play when it came for him with Jerome Brown on the field, but he was definitely aggressive like that off the field as well. And he didn't take any shit, and I can appreciate that.
Absolutely. He did not. And and I want to start honestly, we know where he's from, that he's from Brooksville, Florida, and came,
Which is
really,
it's like that's like close to Gainesville, right? Like
yeah,
I'm trying to
not
like
far.
not far from there.
Not
Yeah,
far from Gainesville, in a real small town that everybody knew everyone. And Jerome, being who he was a very popular guy in the town. But to me, he was a standout player in high school. But he gets done high school in 1983 and gets recruited by some places. But it's interesting because when thinking about it and getting ready for the show, Howard Schnellenberger was the coach at Miami. And Miami was not, now a lot of people know the U and all that stuff, and they know the history
yeah.
and the dynasty.
It wasn't the U back then.
It wasn't the U.
Sure.
Stellenberger kind of built something there. And honestly, Jerome Brown is a key point of this 83 recruiting class where you had Alonzo Highsmith, Melvin Bratton, Winston Moss, Brian Blaze, Daniel Stubbs. Jerome was a key point of that, a key piece. Looking at it, I say honestly him, Alonzo Highsmith, and probably Melvin Bratton. And Bratton
Right.
got redshirted that first year. That's the foundation that built the U into one of college football's greatest dynasties. And Jerome Brown is a focal point of that.
Right, and then the next year they get Irvin, like Michael Irvin, and he's like a big, obviously a big part of that. So that '84 class might have been even better, talent wise. But what Schellenberger was trying to do was just trying to build the Miami like what it is to. Well, I don't want to say today, but what it turned out to be, And what he was doing is he was shutting out the rest of the country and just trying to recruit all those Florida kids and to go, to go to Miami. And even Schellenberger was talking about like he was surprised that Jerome went to Miami. You know what I mean? Like being so close to Florida, and he was, thinking he was going to go to Florida, and he didn't. He came to the U, and and the rest is history. And you're right, like that '83 class was so important for that program and what they built and what it turned out to be. And then obviously Jimmy Johnson comes in, and then the rest is definitely history. But that class definitely was a big part of what happened in Miami.
And Jerome gets on the field that first year, and Miami winds up with that upset over Nebraska to become national champions in '83.
Yeah, he started that game.
Yeah, he starts in that game. And you look at it, you can make a case, honestly, the most important player in Miami football history, Jerome Brown, honestly.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a very good point. I never really looked at it that way, but That's a good point.
Well, and for those who are wondering, like, why I will back it up, because you look at it. So 83, they shocked the world, national champions. Howard Schnellenberger leaves, though. Bring in Jimmy Johnson. They get rocked. You know, Jimmy Johnson's first year was a very tough year because he had to keep Schnellenberger's assistants for that year and all that stuff. They had the Doug Flutie, the Hail Mary game that year and all that. But they wind up emerging, and you've seen it. The attitude and Jimmy Johnson allowed it. He allowed the players we know in Dallas to be who they are. But for anyone you can watch the 30 for 30, you can watch on YouTube when Miami under Jimmy started emerging, they took on the attitude. Now, these guys all had swagger. Like we said, Michael Irvin's there, Alonzo Highsmith, the Blades brothers, Melvin Bratton, Daniel Stubbs, on. But you see at the coin toss when they're talking trash in that Oklahoma game to Brian Bosworth.
Yeah, and they were number one. They were like America's team, you know.
Exactly.
Them good old boys from the Midwest, and Barry Switzer, and, you know, that whole unit came, and that was supposed to be one of the best teams of all time in that Oklahoma Sooner team. And that coin toss was something to see. If you have never seen it before, check it out, YouTube. It's something, but it's something to see.
Because it's on CBS. It's a nationally game of the week. Brent Musburger's doing it. And they're calling Bosworth a bitch, and you ain't nothing. And they're mic'd up.
Yeah,
and and they're you see Jerome Brown high. They're following Jerome's lead on that.
Yeah, and it wasn't like a joke. Like,
no,
you know, Jerome Brown was standing there, staring right at him, and telling him right to his face that he's a bitch. He's not a player. They're going to win this game. This is nothing. And it's like, you're watching this, and it's just you're in disbelief. Like I've never seen anything like that to this day. Like, dudes just talking to them like that, right to their faces. It was an amazing thing. Again, OU was ranked first. I think Miami was fourth.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a huge game, like you mentioned. It was on ABC, but man, like that was a sight to see.
And the stories, you know, so many, but just like the night before, he's calling Jamel Holloway the quarterback. He's calling Jerome's lead. They're all following Jerome's lead.
Yeah, he started that.
And he's taught in the middle of the night calling Oklahoma players, calling Jamel Holloway the Oklahoma starting quarterback. You know, doing the whole Warriors, Jamel, come out and play. Like we know that stuff later on from the U, but it had to start somewhere. And it started in this era, and it started with who? They're following Jerome Brown's lead. And when I say, like, I'm not saying he's the greatest football player in the U's history. There's a lot of great players. But most important, they have to have a foundation. And he, like you said, he's before even Michael Irvin. The playmaker is one of those early guys. But getting ready for the show, it's like, yeah, he came even before Michael. And I don't think Michael was a leader, but while Jerome was there, I believe Jerome Brown was the leader of that team.
Well, yeah, because it took Irvin a couple years. Like, you know, he's a freshman in '84. You know, he's not going to come in and be Michael Irvin as a freshman. Like, no, that's going to take a year, maybe even the next following season. But no, I was looking at that too, and I was looking at like defensive linemen and stuff like that in Miami, and I was like, yeah, that's right. Jerome was the first one. Like, I think Highsmith might have been the most important recruit, because like he was like the first like really big like recruit that like came into Miami and kind of shifted a lot of that and got a lot of guys to come in from Florida to Miami. But yeah, I mean Jerome, he was probably the most important when it comes to like that culture that Miami built, you know. And it was because it was based on a lot of his attitude and a lot of other those players too. But he was a huge part of that.
No, and the stories, you know. Troy Aikman has said his career turned out differently because of one guy, Jerome Brown. Yep. Troy Aikman's at Oklahoma playing for Barry Switzer. They're throwing the ball around, and this is the later game, not the Bosworth trash-talking game, but Troy Aikman is throwing the ball around, and Jerome's like, we got to get this guy out the game. And what does Jerome do? He takes Troy Aikman out. He breaks his leg.
And it wasn't like a dirty hit.
Not a dirty hit.
He put him out the game. And I think Aikman was a freshman, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. Freshman or sophomore. He might have redshirted or something. I don't know.
Yeah, he was killing them though, and you know everybody knew Aikman was going to be this good player, and I didn't think he was going to win Super Bowls later on in his career. But And again, we're thinking about Oklahoma, so what type of offense Barry Switzer was running, but still, like Aikman was killing them that game, and Jerome got to him, and that was over.
And Aikman, winds up transferring to UCLA and becoming number one pick, but
right.
So like he can look back on it and see that, but in the moment,
hell no.
he's not too fond of him, like obviously because he broke his leg, and that was the kind of guy Jerome Brown was. He walked the walk, he talked the talk, and he was going to do it. And people may think, well, that's dirty. No, like Jose said, wasn't a dirty hit. And,
no, absolutely.
And that was and still is the game. If you can cleanly take somebody out, you're going to do it, and that's what Jerome Brown did on that play. Like he took him out. It was clean, but he took him out.
Yeah, I can't remember the offensive lineman's name, but it was a game against West Virginia. I don't know if it was that season or the season before. And the offensive lineman was talking shit, and he was talking about Jerome and shit, like nothing like that. And the first two plays, it was 2 sacks, Jerome Brown. Like he was just a dominant player, man. Like from the start, man. And it's just he was just. And I remember in that Football Life that they did for Reggie White and Jerome Brown. Michael Irvin was making a comment. He was just like, I've seen him like go around guys like with speed. I've seen him pick up offensive linemen and just throw them out of the way. And like that combination of like speed and power, the league hadn't seen that at that time. Like, I mean, there were some great players. There's obviously great players before him and after him, but like at the defensive tackle position, like that speed, but still able to the ability to bull rush and stop the run and all that. It was rare at that time.
It absolutely was, and I don't know that, and that's why for me because you're right, Alonzo Highsmith was a big time recruit for him, but I just feel like Jerome brought that attitude, and Jerome brought what the U became, what they're going to be known for forever with that swagger. That starts with him, and that's why I think he's the most important guy in this school's history. Because what's the story, his senior year, that 86 year, they're dominant, and they're going to the Fiesta Bowl to play Penn State for the national title game. And Jose, now I'm not born when this happens, and you're probably what, 5 or something? Like
5, yeah.
For so long, before I even saw the footage, I knew that story about Miami going down to that Fiesta Bowl, and they're all wearing Army fatigues. And that story has such a lore. Talk about, like, sometimes you wonder what what will last in history, sports, or whatever. That story still is talked about today, about the U coming to that game, all wearing Army fatigues, and they're ready for battle. And that was led, whose idea was it? Who was the guy leading them? It was Jerome
Who was the first
Brown.
one out of the plane?
Jerome
out of the plane. Yep. Yeah, it's a pretty intimidating thing to see, man. And again, like that team, the Miami team was great. It was a great team, obviously playing in the Fiesta Bowl for the national championship. And, they were trying to make a statement, and they made a statement, and they didn't win the game. So the statement at the end of the day wasn't made. But, that wasn't the only moment there where, that in for that game or, before the game that he made the news, right? They had like that dinner, I think it's the day before or that Thursday or whatever it is. And they walked out on that dinner, and he made the speech, on stage, and, he just told everybody, let's go. And what they do, they all followed suit, and they followed right behind him. So I agree, man. He was definitely the leader of that 86 team for sure. And they was just, whatever he wanted to do, whatever he was telling them to do, that team was going to do it.
Well, you look at it, the quote he gave, and we're going to get into this a little bit more too, but like Jerome also fought what we talk about with the U and with the Eagle and like that media and hip hop and the media not really being up and down and not accepting. Jerome got a lot of that personally as well. So he fought a lot of this when he was alive, when he was playing. And you see, now the story always went, they came in fatigued and they just abruptly left the dinner. Now, a lot of times they're coming out that Penn State
that
players
wasn't the case. Yeah.
were making fun of Jimmy Johnson, and maybe it was all like a skit or whatever, but they didn't like that. They were making fun of their coach. So then Jerome gets up and says, did the Japanese go and sit down and have dinner with Pearl Harbor before they bombed them? And you hear Miami go, no, fellas, let's go. And then everyone leaves. coaches leave. And I'll say this: I love that Jimmy Johnson was like, well, I was ready to leave. I was done. I was bored. I was ready to go too. Like he didn't like
Yeah.
waver. He was with his guys, and it just showed the impact that Jerome had, that this team had, and that this was not something that the media had seen from a team, but especially a college team.
College team, yeah.
They weren't used to seeing. They were used to the Notre Dames and the Penn States and Alabamas and USCs and just the bands playing and the bah, 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 and all that stuff. Woody Hayes and that Joker. But, they were used to all that stuff. They weren't used to these young black kids in your face dominating, beating these traditional powerhouses.
Blowing them out.
Blowing them out.
Blowing them out.
And having swag with it, There's something about it when you look at that time frame of you get Miami in college football, you get Georgetown, the Hoyas in college basketball at the time, and how that culture shift just changed everything that we're still seeing to this day. And it's just crazy that Jerome's that big part of it.
Right, absolutely. And we again, you mentioned it earlier, we definitely talked about like that Georgetown mid-'80s, towards in the 90s, right? Like mid-'90s, that UNLV team, late 80s, early 90s team. Like, I don't think there's like a coincidence in that. Like, it's more of just like kids from the inner city getting that opportunity more and more. And then what hip hop became and what it has become at this point. And that was just the evolution. And I think both of those things were evolving right at the same time. And it was like one was elevating the other. And it was just like it was like a train, man, that the society was not going to stop, because again, like you had these kids becoming prominent players in all these leagues, especially like football and especially college football, because they're like the younger generation. And, you have them and they're just elevating these programs and themselves and their brands, whatever the case. But then again, you have hip hop where it's like, again, it comes from the same areas, right? It comes from the inner cities, and that's starting to elevate, and that's becoming mainstream. And, the establishment is scared of the hip hop, revolution. And again, there's these same kids that come from that same area. They're now playing in these big time programs, and now they're going to the league and they're going in the NFL. And the same people who are scared of this hip hop revolution are also looking at these players the same exact way. So it was just so much in your face that I just think society was not prepared for that.
Well, and don't get me wrong, I don't want to make it seem like it's all Jerome. I think Jerome led it in a lot of ways, but there was other guys too. And obviously we know with John Thompson in Georgetown and Pat Ewing in basketball. But what are we seeing now? What are we hearing in pro sports now? And we're hearing this fight in college football and college basketball now. Player empowerment. Player empowerment. I do believe, and you can definitely say openly with the 1980s, this era, when Jimmy Johnson really got there too, the Miami Hurricanes, that's like really the first team to talk about. They knew their worth.
Right.
And they knew like the hypocrisy that was going on in the media, in the national media, but also in their own university. With
in
their
own backyard. Their own backyard. Yeah.
And that's where it's crazy that, Jerome had that quote because the president, Tad Foote, was, big on, he wanted to make Miami the Ivy League of the South. Right. And he was really critical of how the swag of the college of the football team, but they were like noticing, hey, you're building all these new buildings here. Where are you getting all this extra income from? Or when you were a student visiting Miami and they're handing out those pamphlets, what's on the front is a picture of Michael Irvin or Jerome Brown or Alonzo Highsmith. So you're ashamed of us. We're a disgrace, but you're taking the money that we're bringing in this revenue. You're gladly taking that, but yet you're ashamed and we should be acting a certain kind of way. Miami and Jerome and this team, Jimmy Johnson, really put that to light. They knew their worth. They knew like, because honestly, they built something, Notre Dame's and all that. I'm not knocking those guys. It's hard to see that when they're established for 40, 50 years at that time, like it's already been there. But those guys knew Miami wasn't shit until they got there as a program, as a university, honestly.
Yeah.
And honestly, as a city in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a rough time for Miami, for sure. And, before, I think it was 79, where Coach, Schellenberger was there, they were almost a D2 school. They were talking about dropping down to D2, and like, can you imagine that? And then he comes and like changes things around, and obviously these recruits start coming in. And then again, we were mentioning earlier, he's recruiting in the state of Florida, and it's, all these players know each other, and they get to Miami, and they can't even drive their cars to Coral Gables without being pulled over by the police. And they were constantly harassed there. But again, because of their play and their success, this university is flourishing because, again, like, they're making so much money off these bowl games and TV deals and all that stuff. Like, it's pretty amazing stuff, like what these guys had to go through. And again, they were so important, not only to that school, but to that city. Because at that point, you didn't have the Miami Heat. There was no, like,
Florida Marlins.
Panthers, Marlins, Tampa Bay Lightning. It was none of that. It was the Dolphins and the U. And at that time, the Dolphins, this is early 80s. This is pre-Marino. Like, they were suffering at that time before Marino came. And this is at the end of, like, that great 70s run. And, yeah, they were more popular than the Dolphins team at that point. And it's amazing they had to go through so much shit.
It is, and you see, like, that's where the innovation. Now we're 35 years in, and now player empowerment, know your worth, that wasn't always a thing. And depending on who's in our audience, like, either they may know that, they may not know that, they may want to forget that or try to forget it, but let's call it what it is. These guys set the way, and they talked about what was being wrong in college sports, but then you see that has gone to the pro sports about, hey, we know our worth, and you're gladly marketing off us, but then you're trying to control us. But then that's the truth. If you're not going to, hey, how they're acting offends you and it's so wrong, then you can't be willing to take in the millions of dollars, billions maybe, that they're bringing in for your school or for this NCAA that you're willing to market off. But shame on you. And these guys were calling that out, and that's huge. That doesn't get talked about in a deep way, that they had that foresight to see that and not just be grateful to be, hey, yeah, we're at Miami. So many people say, I hate that argument. Just be glad you got a scholarship to a university.
Yeah, free education, to one of the best schools in the country. Like, okay.
And
I get that.
I get it that, okay, I had this free education, but I always tell people, all right, so at Miami, what if Jerome Brown said, hey, Jimmy Johnson, and Jimmy was an advocate for the players, but I can't practice. I have homework, and it's I want to do well on this test, so I got to study all week. How often can a player say that at all, and then you think that scholarship stays?
Right.
Or, you know what? Hey, I went to college. I was able to work. I did jobs while, to help out. So it wasn't no great money. I ain't going to brag on it. But, like, I was able to do that.
Something, yeah.
It was something. You got these guys, Jerome Brown, 6'2", 290, 300 pounds, and then he's getting a stipend of, like, $50 a week that for food.
Yeah.
Like, come on. Like, these guys were calling it out before anybody else was, and that's huge.
Right, and then they start doing things that, they're trying to earn money on the side, right? And then now you have, boosters on the side, right? Like, paying them to do this and paying them to do that. Like, they had, and all teams do this. I don't care who they are. They put up pots for, like, biggest hits, and, like, I know, like, like the Saints and all, they got in trouble for, like, the bounty gate and stuff like that. All teams do that. I don't care what they say. Like, they all do that. I know that they feel like we talking about this Eagles team, like, late 80s, early 90s. They definitely did that. It was not a secret either. And, so you had these players trying to make money on the side like that. Like, they had to do whatever they had to do to earn something, like earn some type of money down there. And, then we look at that and go, oh, well, they shouldn't be doing that either. But again, we can't give these guys any money. Like, it's crazy, man. Again, like, you can sit back and from the outside looking in, it's like, oh, if I had that opportunity, I'm going to definitely take it. A full ride to a great university. Like, I get that argument to an extent, you know what I mean? But again, like, when you're exploiting these players because they're at that university, then that's where the problem is.
And I never did. I never did because a lot of times you're not setting them up for success when you're at these big time, especially in college football and college basketball.
Yeah, you're just like, you're done, go. Okay.
Yeah, and a lot of times that's what it was. Like, you're just there, and then a lot of times you're not caring about them as students. You're not caring about what goes on there. And guess what? It's that classic statement I've always heard, and I've told it to you, where I remember the one guy who was a voice actor for The Simpsons, and he was like, hey, we're so overpaid because we're doing voices for a cartoon and we're getting this money. Like, man, we're so lucky. And then he started seeing what the Fox execs and all these producers, that they're getting billions of dollars and no one's giving them rate, and they're the ones doing the voice acting. And then he's like, wait a minute, now we're the most underpaid people because people are becoming billionaires off of our work. And it's kind of like, that's where it's like, yeah, you're playing a game, you're going to university. So on its core value, it's great. Whether it's football, basketball, baseball, soccer, yeah, that's fun. You're young and you're playing.
If you're comparing it to what we're doing, then we're going to look at that like, why are you complaining?
But there's no different than us. Whereas, guess what? When we're on a job and we see like this company, they're getting all this labor. I'm giving them extra labor a lot of times, and they're profiting and benefiting. And no one's talking about giving that profit or benefit to me, and I'm doing the labor. It's my blood.
You see the boss pulling up and like some brand new Porsche or something like that, and you know what I mean? Like I've been there for sure.
Yeah, exactly. I have too, and like it's off of me as my coworkers or me and my teammates in this case. Our blood, sweat, and tears. It's our sacrifice for football. It's their sacrifice because hey. As we saw with Jerome's teammate Melvin Bratton in '87,
right?
He gets hurt in the national title game. His career for the pros is done after that.
Yep.
It was shot after that injury. So all that blood, sweat, and tears and all those things, and you're not getting the benefit, and you're putting this school on the map. And not only are they not paying you, but then they're going to chastise you. It's a huge and important thing that I think people need to remember, that these guys started that. And now it's like, hey, NIL deals, and now it's player empowerment, but it had to start somewhere. And this was in that story, this is chapters on what you did and what Georgetown did in the mid 80s.
Right. And then when you have a school or a team, again, just like the Georgetowns, the UNLVs, and obviously these Hurricane teams, Florida State, like, all these teams back then, it's like when you have a team that like scares the establishment, what they do in turn, and we've heard it all, like, I know you've heard it, I know I've heard it, but if you're listening to the show, like, I'm sure you probably heard it as well. And then they start getting labeled, and, it's like, the thugs and all that stuff, all these labels start to come out, and the media is killing them a little extra, like they shouldn't be on TV, like all this stuff, like because they're doing all these antics or whatever, having fun out there. And that's how they counter that.
Right.
Like it's like by beating them down and just constantly like the scrutiny on this program. And it was big time when it came to Miami. And that's why I felt like also like this attitude of like, it's all us against them. And that's why I think they had so much success, because there was all these kids from the inner city where they would, if it wasn't for football, there was no other opportunity, and well, I mean, I don't want to say that, but they were getting opportunities, but coming from where some of them kids come from, where I came from, where you come from, there, I mean, it's like the opportunities are very limited, what I'm saying? And I think like that can make a team like closer. Like all these guys played against each other in high school. They all knew each other. So it just made them come together. And when you have your own university giving you shit, when you have NCAA coming out with like with a tape showing what you should not be doing after plays and things like that, and they're just saying it was like our highlight video. Like when you have so many people against you, it can only make you as a team, make you even stronger. And it did for this Miami team for sure, because again, we were talking about them playing the Notre Dames and OUs and Penn States. Like, yeah, they lost in 87, but they were smashing all these teams. They were blowing them out by 30, 40 points. And it was just, I can understand why that attitude was there, because again, it was so much against them.
And, Miami winds up losing that. They get upset by Penn State. But
Because if any Testaverde, let's just keep it real.
honestly, Penn State winds up having
He threw
Miami.
5 picks.
Yeah, Testaverde threw 5 picks. Miami doubles them in offense. Penn State had 163 total yards of offense in that game. And some people say, well, was it the fatigues, the Army fatigues, or leaving the dinner? Jerome Brown had 5 sacks in that game.
Right.
So he came to play.
Right. And it just, again, I always say this, I definitely say this on this show. It's like when it shows what Vinny Testaverde was going to become anyway. You know what I mean? Like, it's just when you put these players in these big-time moments. No, I don't know.
Me neither.
And I don't hate him, but he's Vinny Testaverde. I don't know what to tell you. Like, but it's like you put these guys in these positions that play these big games where a lot of dudes that are going to be in the league the next year as well, and they come out like that. That's going to me. That just says so much. Like, I mean, you can have your combine. Like, you can. I'm looking at that. You know what I mean? I'm dissecting those games, and right there, we should have known this dude is not going to be shit. He was the first pick.
He was the first pick that year in the draft.
It's crazy, but it just showed again. Like, it wasn't because what the defense didn't do. It was Miami dominated. It was just turnovers killed them.
Yeah, and I think honestly, what happened was people want to point to the fatigues. A lot of people want to say that was it, and this team had too much. I think it was carrying for young kids. And Jimmy Johnson, you got to look at it. That was his first time playing in a national title game as a head coach.
Right.
So he's a young, coach in college, and they're going through all this, and they're doing something different, and they're getting attacked from all over, and they're this new, bully on the block in college football. I think it was the combination of all that kind of took its toll on Miami in that championship game, and what led to them getting upset in that game. Not Jerome and the team's stuff for that week leading into it.
Right, and then on the other sideline, we just talked about Jimmy Johnson and how he let his players play, and he was advocating for them to do what they normally did, and it was just like celebrate after sacks, all this stuff. On the other side, you got Joe Pa, Penn State. Like again, like we were talking about Oklahoma earlier. It's like the good old boys, like, you know what I mean? Like, they did things the right way. Their kids graduated. You know what I mean? Like, Joe Pa did the right thing all the time. He was like a god. And, we're looking at that. And then, like, on the national scene, America is looking at this Miami team like, we don't want this team to win, the national championship. Like, let's go Penn State. Like, and, they had most of the country rooting for Penn State. And again, because they did it the right way, and we had to show these guys who are not doing it the right way, who are all in your face, we had to show them how it's really done and blah, blah, blah. But again, Miami dominated that game. You can go back and check that game out. It was just killer turnovers by a quarterback who was not that good. But yeah, that happens.
Jerome, that in '86, that winds up, that's his senior year. That's his final game. He's a finalist for the Outland and Lombardi trophies.
Dominant season.
Those that's for best lineman in college football. He's a finalist for that. And he's, declared for the '87 draft, and he winds up being the 9th pick overall. Miami was strong. That's how talented. Like you said, Vinny was the first pick. Alonzo Highsmith wound up being the 3rd pick to the Oilers.
He went 3rd.
So, but the best of the 3 of them, Jerome wound up going 9th to the Eagles. And Jose, I know before we started the show, you were talking about a story that you had heard Phil Simms say about when, the Eagles wound up drafting Jerome in the '87 draft.
Right. It was even before it was that day, I think the day of the draft. And, Bill Parcells calls Phil Simms, and he was just like, hey, Phil, like, are you ready? And he was like, what are you talking about? He's like, our lives are about to change. The Philadelphia Eagles are about to draft Jerome Brown. And at that point, we have Reggie White, Buddy Ryan's obviously here. This Eagles defense is already establishing itself as one of the top units in the league at that point. Buddy Ryan coming from that Bears 46 style scheme that he had implemented there. He was just starting to build this thing in Philly, and he added that other piece where not only you had the best defensive end of all time in Reggie White, and possibly, arguably, the best defensive player of all time. Like, obviously, there's definitely debates to have it that it was a lot of great defensive players. But you had that on defensive end, and now you add this dominant force up the middle, and there's nowhere for these quarterbacks to go. You can't step up. Jerome's there. If you try to roll out, Reggie's there. Then, we got Clyde Simmons on the other end who becomes an all-pro. It's just they're building this dominant force, and again, Jerome Brown. And the league knew, like, adding Jerome Brown to a defensive line with Reggie White was going to be outstanding.
And I think, like you said, that story says a lot. Like,
right,
as great as Reggie White is, and I do think, greatest D lineman. I think greatest defensive player in NFL history. If you guys want to debate that, you can follow Twitter.
Yeah, I know we got a lot of Giants fans that follow us too. Like, we can have that conversation. I know you want to put LT in there, and rightfully so, but it's definitely a conversation we can have.
But that says something when a coach is great as Parcells, and you're looking at it. And honestly, I've heard that story many times too. That's right after the Giants win the Super Bowl. The Giants are the defending world champions when this draft comes around. So that's even bigger that Parcells is saying our lives are going to change. And now that's in the division with, Washington and Joe Gibbs and all that. The Giants had already established that rivalry with the Niners and the conference. So for, them to be looking at in Buddy's second year, the Eagles didn't have a good first year under Buddy. In that second year, and him saying our lives are going to change. And he was right. It wasn't like he was wrong.
No,
he was right.
He was spot on. Yeah.
I don't know, because to me when I hear that comment, it's like that's the genius of Bill Parcells, but then also, this is just me freestyling right now, then why wasn't he the first pick of the draft? Like,
Right.
I mean, I'm grateful he wasn't. You see, I got the Jerome jersey behind me, but I'm kind of like, why wasn't he the first pick?
Yeah, I mean, it was just defensive tackles were not picked first overall. There's another Miami defensive tackle a couple years later, and Russell Maryland gets picked first, and I'll definitely talk about that a little bit later as well when we talk about Jerome's legacy. But first pick was Tampa. They were making a lot of mistakes, right? And at that time, but I just feel like if the Giants were picking 8th, I think Parcells picked Jerome Brown. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I think it's like without a doubt. But you were talking about that Giants team. That '86 defense is one of the best defenses of all time. And again, I think the respect that Bill Parcells had for Reggie White and for Jerome Brown, he knew what was coming. You know what I mean? Like, and he knew defensively, like, this Eagles team was going to be something. They're going to have to deal with this team, man. It was going to be a problem. And, years later, like, the Eagles were dominating the Giants at that time. And even though the Giants were that good, it was still, like, it was a tough game.
I just laughed. I'm not trying to knock anybody, but I'm just like, imagine if, like, the draft was different and Vinny Testaverde, like, slides down. I don't think Parcells was talking to Phil Simms. He was to Vinny Testaverde. Our lives are going to change. They have Vinny like, that's not, I look at the draft, Alonzo Highsmith, even Cornelius Bennett, was taken. Yeah. He was a good player. I like Biscuit, but like, let's be real. If you give me all these other guys who were picked before Jerome, I don't think Bill Parcells is saying that. Shane Conlon, the Eagles took Shane. Our lives are going to change. He's not, not going to say that. And Shane Conlon looked good in the national title game. He got a few picks off of Vinny. There's something that Bill knew, and I believe other people did too, but who knows? But, like, he knew Jerome was going to be that special, and he knew it was going to be a problem.
Yeah, it was Jerome, and then Rod Woodson was next. Another great player.
Yeah, another great player. And the 8 before,
suspect.
Not a strong. The 87 draft, Jerome and Rod saved that top 10 from, who knows, maybe being the worst ever.
Yeah, because it was tough.
It's a rough. Yeah.
Even like if you go like first round in general, like Mark Ingram to the Giants at the end of the first round.
Bruce Armstrong was a good tackle for the Patriots at 23.
Yeah,
he was good.
Jim Harbaugh was decent. Nate Odoms. Decent.
You're not hype on Boz. Boz was there. He was supplemental, but
He
they
was
had
supplemental,
Boz.
yeah.
But
Tim McDonald was a good player.
and Harris Barton was good for the Niners. Those
Yeah,
championship
he was
teams.
a good player too. Yeah,
He was good. I think there's some good players later rounds that save it, but that's a rough first round, by the way.
yeah,
But
yeah. But again, like that being Parcells knew what was coming, and I think a lot of the league knew what was coming, and teaming those two up just by themselves, you could have had anyone else, the other end and the other tackle. Like it was just those two were going to create. You couldn't double team either one of them. You know what I mean? Like if you double team Reggie, you were getting to Jerome. Go ahead, Darren.
Well, I was going to say let's look at it, and before we kind of go individually into Jerome, we hear about great D lines in history. Obviously, Steel Curtain, Purple People Eaters, Fearsome Foursome.
Yeah.
There's great D lines. I never hear in that list, and I didn't have a nickname like those guys did, but when you give for a good 4 to 5 year run, you have Reggie White, Jerome Brown, Clyde Simmons, and you can switch in. You had Mike Pitts and Golick were there, but
Andy Harmon,
but still all three of those guys were one's obviously in the Hall of Fame in Reggie. Clyde Simmons is in the 100 sack club.
Right, that's the name. That's the name, I think, for me, that people don't really talk about.
Had a long, lengthy career, and we know for it's a short time how dominant Jerome was, all-pro player. Why do we not talk about that group up there with the Steel Curtain and the Purple People Eaters and all that as greatest defensive line of all time? And do you think that they should? Do you think is that off, or do you think that they shouldn't be talked about?
I don't think it's off. I know ESPN did like a ranking. I think it was like 20. I can't remember what year it was. It might have been 2010. I'm not sure. It was recent enough. And they did like the top 30 defenses in the last 30 years. And the Eagles 91 team was number one. And this is ahead of like 2000 Baltimore, like, that Bucks defense. Like, and not to say they were like, statistically, they were like they held quarterbacks like 44% passing. Like it was something crazy like that. They led the league in sacks. They had like 26 interceptions. They had like 55 sacks. Like it was just such a dominating season, and it all started with those three guys that you were talking about. And again, like that's why I mentioned like Clyde Simmons, 121 sacks. Like that might have been the quietest 121 sacks of all time because nobody really talked about him because you had Reggie White on the other side, and everybody's like, well, yeah, Reggie's getting double teamed, and you're singling up Simmons. He still got to get there. You know what I mean? Like, and then you can just plug up anyone else next to Jerome Brown at that defensive tackle, like you talked about Mike Pitts and Golick. But again, if Reggie's giving you 18 sacks a game, Jerome's giving you 9 or 10, and then you got Clyde on the other side giving you 14, 15, like year in and year out. Like that's dominance, but again, the same knock with this defense is why they're not up there with the 85 Bears defense and like that Giants defense and, that Baltimore defense. It's that, come big games, they weren't there. You know what I mean? So, and that's
the counter that I'm going to give is to that, because I think you're right in why, but it's not a counter to you because you're not saying it, but to the people,
right.
Is that I feel like in the past decade, when it comes to a different position group, the linebackers, the Dome Patrol never won a playoff game.
Right.
But they're starting to get loved as
they should.
Some people are calling them greatest linebacking core ever. And you can debate that whether you agree or not, but I think that they should be talked about in that, at least talked about. And for a long time, I never heard them growing up in that group. You knew about like
that's recent. Like that's
very recent. Yeah, very recent. Like they named the Steelers linebacking crew. They named the Bears and
like
the 80s, Giants.
Yeah.
But recently the Dome Patrol of the late 80s, early 90s linebacking corps is getting that. And I think, and they have a great nickname, Dome Patrol. And so like I think that the Eagle, that team, that needs to start happening. Like great defensive lines, because I'll be honest. I'm putting this D line over the '85 Bears D line.
Yeah, no, hands down. Yeah, that's.
You know
I
what I
think that's
mean?
easy. Yeah,
But
because if you do a play for player, it's like you go Dent, Reggie White. Like I think that's an easy one there. You go Clyde Simmons. Um, well, you go Jerome Brown, McMichael. I'm going Jerome Brown. Like Dan Hampton, Clyde Simmons. I think I go. I mean Dan Hampton there, but
and
um,
Fridge was
and
there,
Fritz,
and
yeah,
he was
yeah,
kind of a wise. Fridge wasn't.
right.
As a defensive tackle, Fridge wasn't nothing special. Let's be honest.
No, no, he was just a big guy.
He
Like
was good. He was good for running the ball in, like honestly, and he was okay at best later on. He did have some plays later, but like nothing special. So I got to be honest. I just think, as a quick side note, that D line that Jerome's a part of needs to get more praised. As when we talk about great D lines of all time, they need to be in the conversation for the greatest and talked about in that top three at least. Like they need to hear more from him. So that's
right,
just I
and
want to say that
yeah, for sure. And it's not like it was just like individual numbers. Like, excuse me, team defense as well. Like with these guys in there, they were top 5, top 10 in the league year in and year out. When Buddy was there, when Buddy left, they were again the following season. When Buddy left, it was the '91 defense, which was one of the best defenses of all time. Like for that one single season, first defense, like first in yards, points per game, and something I can't even remember the other stat, but they were the first one to go across. I think it was against the run pass points per game. I think they went straight across number one, and it was just a dominant defense, and it's not like they were playing against like it's not like they were in the NFC like North or whatever, or the Norris division, whatever it used to be called. They were the Giants top 10 offense, Redskins top 10 offense, and the Cowboys were a top 15 offense if I'm not mistaken that season, and they were playing good teams twice a year. You know what I mean? Like they were playing 3 really good teams, and then you had the Cardinals, and they would beat up on the Cardinals, but is again the competition was there, and they were still holding teams down to like 10, 14 points a game. It was just something crazy number, man. It's just I think Brett Favre called this the Eagles defense. That Eagles defense probably the best defense he's ever played against. It's just this team, Jerome Brown for sure doesn't get talked about enough as one of the greats. But again, like I understand that he played 5 seasons, so if you're not from Philly, you probably don't even think about Jerome Brown.
No, a lot of people don't. But and the main reason why we want to do this episode, and I think, he comes in here in '87 and he fits into this defense right away. And I think what's something is we know historically how Buddy is with young players.
Yeah.
Buddy was tough. But there's something about it, and I wish there was more people would talk about with that Buddy Jerome relationship.
Right.
And I think Buddy loves his guy, loves his defense, and we know with other players and the Bears and stuff, he has special spot. I really feel from different quotes and Buddy had a special bond with Jerome, and he as a player he had to perform, but I think Buddy liked Jerome's swag, his personality, his brash, his loudness, and was a big proponent of letting that carry on to the rest of the squad.
Right, and letting it play on the field. It was just like we talked about Jimmy Johnson with like the U. It's like he let his guys do that. He did it himself. You know what I mean? Like he would talk a lot of shit in the media. He would say stuff to coaches and stuff, and in press conferences. And he wanted his players to do that again. Like they were the bully on the block. That especially that Eagles defense, and they would kind of like punch you in the face. And if you didn't counter that they were going to dominate you that game, and he was going to blitz you, and he was going to call the dogs, and they were just going to go after you, man. And again, some of the teams that would punch back were like those Redskins, Giants teams, like what I mean, like it was Cowboys later on, and that's where the Eagles had trouble. But like that famous quote that Buddy Ryan said that I had 45 Jerome Browns, I wouldn't lose the game.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just the respect that he had for Jerome, and he knew he was great. Obviously, he took him 8th, so he knew something was there. But Yeah, I agree. I think Buddy and him had a really great relationship that does not get talked about a lot.
And you kind of see it's early on. Jerome, there's not really like that huge like learning gap or curve. Like Jerome's a dynamic player from the
Right from
start
the
with
jump.
this team, and is making his impact known. Um, the problems, the issues that Jerome had in Philly wasn't so much the performer, the player. He and we talk about the man, but hey, he's a human being. He was flawed. There were some things with him off the field that he was colorful personality. He was funny, but he also showed he was a young guy,
Yeah.
and honestly, kind of showed some flashes of what would tragically happen later. Things like that were kind of showing throughout his time here in Philly.
Yeah, you hear stories like Jeff Fisher has a real good story about the way he was driving in the parking lot one time doing like over 100 miles an hour. And, just, some guys have a tough time like turning it off from the field. And that was what makes them great, right? But the thing is, like, you can't live life like that either. You know what I mean? And I know Reggie White was like really instrumental in trying to like calm that down a little bit. But when you're young and you have money and you're very successful and you're great at what you do, it's you can give as much advice as possible. I know it's happened to me. It goes through one year out the other until life experience forces you to kind of like change that. And at that point in his life, he never really had that. So it was just more of like him just being Jerome Brown and having fun. And again, I can't knock somebody for wanting to have fun, but some of the stuff that he was doing was borderline like out of control.
He was out of control for sure, and you watch it, you research and see like he had a love for speed, a love for cars, love for bikes,
Right.
and teams. I think you see later on, kind of they'll put in players contracts about that, like because it's they're investing a lot of money in you, so they want to protect their investment, but B, it and I'm not knocking people. You can love cars and love bikes and be
Right. Right.
responsible, but that need for speed it's dangerous and it's taking a lot of people away from here, not just Jerome, but there was a lot of foreshadowing with it. And one of the odd stories is he when he in the off season, one of the years when he's with Philly, he's back in his hometown Brooksville and winds up saving a young girl's life, a few years before his own death. It was in a crazy accident, was going too fast. And it's like those are those warnings that maybe you're like, hey, I
Right.
should slow down too. Like this is dangerous. Like that you wish he would have picked up on.
Right. And it's tough. You know what I mean? Like 'cause these guys think they're Superman. You know what I mean? Like they all their life they've been dominant on the field and in a man's game. You know what I mean? Like where it's like I can move you. You're standing there. I can pick you up and move you if I really wanted to. And it's they feel indestructible, man. And it doesn't. Those signs can come, and for a lot of players. I'm not saying all, because some of these players do see that and they go, okay, yeah, I'm gonna change some stuff up. But he didn't feel like that, and he was living his life. And I remember watching an interview. I think it was Reggie White's um, wife or widow, obviously now, but and she was talking about it, like Jerome Brown was that young buck, and Reggie was trying to like calm him down, but she's like, you can see there was no calming him down. Like he was out here to live life, and he definitely was doing that.
And the thing is, there's a great book on that Eagles team. Mark Bowden wrote it, Bringing the Heat, and he
Yep.
really highlights. He starts it before, but he really highlights the team, like Jerome's like death, and then that season after Jerome's death really gets the spotlight. And a lot of those guys, he says, were really kind of like they were envy. They were living vicariously. They're trying to be like Jerome because Jerome was young, making good money, was a
Right.
star. So the ladies were chasing him. He was doing that. He was living fast, and he was a young guy. And a lot of those, but he also was kind of devil may care, anti-authority, anti-establishment, his kind of guy. And a lot of those guys kind of fed off of that on the field, but they fed off it off the field too, and really
Exactly.
wanted. And hey, I don't want to speak for you. I bet like I'm guilty. I was guilty of that. There's those
Yeah.
guys you're like, man, like they're living, especially when you're young and they're living fat and they're getting all the girls. They're at the attention, and it's like, man, you wish you were there, and then you're cool with them, and you're trying to like you try to like ride that wave if you can. Like, all right, like I'm trying to get this, and some of it, in the moment, it's like I'm pushing this too far, but you're just seeing this guy do it and he's living life and you're thinking that's what you want. And like you said, with those experiences and hopefully what we've been given that Jerome wasn't, time, you learn
Hmm.
not to do that. But he affected this team the field, but off the field as well in a lot of ways too.
Yeah, and sometimes it's very unfortunate, but some people have to be like the message. You know what I mean? Like, and it's very, very, very unfortunate to even look at it like that. But again, like I'm sure his tragic death, again, like we talked about how much that impacted this team, but again, I'm sure it changed a lot of lives within that organization and within that team. Like on like, all right, I gotta like slow down. You know what I mean? Like I'm going a little too hard right now, and we're talking about late '80s, early '90s. So I'm not saying these guys were doing drugs and not like that, but it's super prevalent at that time of sports and stuff. Like I'm sure they were having their fun and going to these nightclubs. So again, like sometimes it takes something like that to kind of change a bunch of lives, and but unfortunately it takes something like that. You know what I mean? So it's sad, man. It was, again, like I mentioned at the beginning, it was, for me, it was the biggest gut punch in sports ever.
Yeah, it really was. And there's a lot of stories and about Jerome and that his short life, but a lot of impact. And
Right.
one of the ones is right after either his rookie year or his second year, he in the offseason, he's back home in Florida, and they're going to have a KKK rally in his
Yeah.
hometown, and Jerome's not having that, and so him and some of his friends wind up breaking up that KKK rally by driving their cars throughout, like on the street, and blasting hip hop music, and those guys going scattered. And a lot of times, doing more like research into that as the years, the police leaned on Jerome to kind of help break that up. And knowing the
Yeah.
figure he
Crazy.
was, the police looked at Jerome in that light. And, he's got to be 24 at the time, 23,
Yeah.
24.
He was
But
young.
he was out there fighting against the KKK. It's the dichotomy that we all have. Was he reckless and young? Yeah. And could be brash and outspoken, but he had a heart too. And
Right.
he did care, and he cared about his hometown. He cared about his teammates, his friends, those he cared about. There's plenty. So for those reckless stories that you hear, there's so many about Jerome that you hear where he had that big heart as well.
Yeah, he had that football camp that, for him, apparently it was like, a big thing for him, and it was like super important. And nowadays most players, well, not most, but a lot of players have these little camps. But again, like he would have all these Eagles players down there helping out with the camp, and I've seen interviews where they were talking about that, and they were like, yeah, he was like super serious, and he really loved that camp, and that was his way at a very early age, like you mentioned, like to give him back to that community that, obviously, again, we talked about it, like how small of a community it was. But again, like when you get a player of that stature who makes it out of there, the most important thing is to give back. You know what I mean? And he definitely understood that, and he was definitely doing it, which was awesome to see.
And that camp, that was his first time. He held it in his hometown. That was about a month and a half before he
Right.
winds up dying.
Yep.
And I think that's where so many times you hear it. We know on the field in those last 2 years, including that legendary 91 defense, Jerome, he's two-time Pro Bowler, but also first team All Pro,
Yeah.
and getting double-digit sacks as a D tackle at that time, which now we've seen it with Warren Sapp and Randall, and we have Aaron Donald to this day, but that still was kind of like rare. I know there was Alan Page before him could get to the quarterback. There were D tackles who got there, but it still wasn't something to see a D tackle get double-digit sacks was rare. And he was really he was a dynamic player throughout those, all those seasons he was in Philly from 87 to 91, but you felt like nationally with the Pro Bowl nods and being all pro, it was starting to click for Jerome as well. And a lot of people say from from that camp that he had run, from, he went to treatment, from, he had Reggie come down to his church. He was starting to make strides and to grow as
Right.
a person, which I think really kind of hurts even more what wound up happening that June day in 92, like that he was starting to grow up and have it click. And it was just taken like that.
Right. He was, the prime of most of NFL players. It's mid-20s, like to late 20s, and again, you were talking about like that 89 season. He had 10.5 sacks. 1990s all team first team all pro. 91 first team all pro, 8th defensive player of the year, Pro Bowl, another Pro Bowl season with another 9 sacks. So you mentioned it from 87 to 91, at 29.5 sacks, in those seasons. So, again, like you may think like, 29.5 sacks, but we're talking about defensive tackle here. And, his first season, he played like 12 games. You know what I mean? Like it's pretty impressive numbers. In Miami in 3 seasons, he had 21 sacks. I think it was 21.5. So again, we're talking about from the defensive tackle position.
And let's remember his rookie year is the strike year.
Right.
So really you're looking at 4 full seasons because the strike year happened in 87. That's his first year. So 29.5, and he played some in 87, but really 4 full seasons he had under his belt. So 5 years for 4 seasons, like fully. So he really was coming. And there's some stories even, Buddy gets fired in 1990, and a lot of people are upset. We know how tight, especially the defense was with Buddy, and then Rich Kotite is promoted from OC to head coach, and a lot of guys were mad at Randall Cunningham. They blame Randall for the offensive struggles that have been in the playoffs. They thought Randall set it up. They thought Rich Kotite was a puppet for ownership at the time, yep. Norman Brayman. So there's a lot of hostility going into that 91 season, which wound up being Jerome's last. And a lot of things happen where you even see Rich Kotite, he was trying to establish the offense and be tougher, and winds up kind of like Jerome says something and Rich says something back, and Jerome's ready to fight the head coach.
No, and there's video footage of this.
Yeah.
Like, there's video footage. You can see that. I've seen it. I know you've seen it there. I mean, it's like he wasn't like just talking. He was trying to fight him. Like, if it wasn't for guys holding him back and really having to hold him back, not like just standing there. Like, they had to like push him off. He was going to whoop his ass. Like, you know what I mean? And that's the head coach.
And to be fair, Rich Kotite was ready to go too. Now you're right. Yeah, he would have lost. He would have lost. Like, he wouldn't have won. But Rich Kotite's a former player. He wanted to fight too. So that just kind of shows where. But at the end of that year, and then when Jerome passes away, what Rich says about him. So it kind of is the up and down with Jerome Brown. Like, he had that thing of you love him 1 minute, hate him the next minute, but then you're back to hugging and laughing with him. Like, Jerome had that kind of personality, like where he's ready to fight the head. A lot of people get blackballed for that,
right?
But Jerome just kind of had that way, and they wound up coming together and having a good relationship. And I think even Jerome apologizing later on for that, but it's something that, because I heard that story for a while. I remember reading Mark Bowden's book, and then I remember seeing a Football Life, and I was seeing they actually have footage of this fight. Like, I think he had and you can see it. Like, he's ready to kill Rich Kotite. Yeah,
I don't know what was said, but he was trying to get after him, man. But again, like, these defensive guys, like you mentioned earlier, really felt like, like Buddy Ryan was set up to lose his job, and because again, they had success on the Buddy Ryan, they just didn't have playoff success, and that's ultimately you got to win playoff games to keep your job. And Buddy, we talked about it on our show when we did our show. Buddy Ryan, check the archives.
Check them.
And it was early on too. It was a nice early on show. It was one of our favorite shows, and we talked about what happened with Buddy and why, did Buddy lose his job. And again, like the talent was here. Like we're talking about all these talented players, and they just, again, the knock on this defense is, and not even I guess it is a knock. Like they don't get talked about with the all-time greats like those Steelers and all those great defenses because they didn't win enough. And again, at the end of the day, to get remembered, you have to win big time games. And they had a lot of great like statement regular season games. They had a lot of nickname games. The House of Pain, the body bag game. Like they had Fog Bowl. Like they were part of so many legendary games, but they don't have that signature dominant like playoff game. You know what I mean? Like again, like these 85 Bears, like the 86 Giants against the 49ers. Like they don't have that dominant game. If they did, then I think this defense and some of these players are talked about more.
Absolutely. So it's you look at it, and so 91 wound up being Jerome's last year. That defense was legendary. They go 10-6 that year, with Randall being knocked out in the second quarter of the first game. A lot of people say, and I don't think it. I think they would have been a playoff team, but people say Super Bowl aspirations could have been had in 91 if Randall's healthy. But you come off of that, and you come off of that strong defensive, season, and now you get Randall back, and you're thinking 92 can be special. Bud Carson's the D coordinator, and then, June 25th, 1992, Jerome's in that Corvette and loses control of it. And the sad, tragic thing that makes you mad at Jerome, the number one thing is, and it happened, and, I believe things happen, you can't argue with what happened. You got to move forward, but his 12-year-old nephew was in the car too, and they both get killed. And that's where it is kind of.
Yeah. Like, what are we doing?
Yeah.
I mean, it's tough to look back and point fingers and stuff like that because it's not going to change anything. So I'm with you on that, Jeremy. But again, like that's the part that is left out a lot of times. And like, Jerome Brown's death is 100% tragic. And again, I know that's why we're doing this show, right? Like it's that tragic. This was 30 years ago, and we're still talking about it. Like it just kind of just happened. But again, the other piece of it is this 12-year-old nephew that he had in the car with him also tragically loses his life as well. And, he didn't have a chance. You know what I mean? Like, he didn't grow up. He wasn't in the NFL. He didn't do any of that stuff. You know what I mean? Like, he still had a whole lot of life to live. And, again, it's you hear kids, it's just a different feeling,
Nah. And so it's something that team never bounced back.
Nope.
Now, 92, there's a lot of things, and it's a saying that we had heard for so long, and I guess with the Eagles winning in 2017, you don't have to hear it anymore, but I heard it for so long, bring it home for Jerome. That was kind of like a slogan for that year, but it went throughout every team that, got to the playoffs for the Eagles years after. Years after Jerome was gone, people never played with Jerome. But throughout the city, Eagles fan, you would say, bring it home for Jerome. And that was the message in 92. And they wound up keeping Jerome's locker that year the same. Interesting story, that first game of the 92 season was against the Saints. And they invited Jerome's family there. And they're, the plan was from ownership, Norman Brayman, have a ceremony and just to, present them with Jerome's jersey that's in this, case kind of, this plastic, like a frame to Jerome's family. So Reggie's out there and Seth, and so Reggie gets the mic and starts going and says, just off script, no one will ever wear number 99 in Eagle history again. And that wasn't the plan. They weren't going to retire Jerome's number, but Reggie said it and said it in front of 65,000 people at the vet, and they go crazy. So Jerome's number was not supposed to be retired, but Reggie White kind of retired it. And number 99 is, no one has worn that jersey since, and it's a special jersey. And And on YouTube, like that's the jersey I have behind me, and it's one of the valued ones I have. And the Eagles did, and they played some inspired ball
Yeah,
in
they did.
honor of Jerome in that season. There's a lot of great moments, one of the great goal line stands of all time happened that year against the Cardinals, where it's like 8 plays at the 1 yard line,
Yeah,
and the Eagles wind up holding them and getting that win 7-3, and they would stop them on 4th down, and then there was offsides,
offsides. Yeah,
which is miraculous. It's one of the great goal line stands in NFL history.
right, right.
Um, Even I know the story of the wild card game in New Orleans at the Superdome and what they do, and that was special as well, and bringing his locker to New Orleans. And
Yeah, when the players didn't even know they were doing that, they walk in the locker room and they see all of Jerome's stuff in there. And again, you talk about the dome patrol, like this is who they were playing. These were the top 2 defenses, or 2 of the top defenses in the league. And New Orleans is at home and they haven't won a playoff game in forever. Maybe ever. I'm trying to think at that point in time.
At that point, never, yeah.
Yeah, and they were, the Eagles were going in there, and we all know playing in the Superdome how that is, and it was a good game, close game. And then the Eagles pulled it out late, but that having that locker there definitely kind of motivated them even more. And we're watching this game, and we're like, holy shit! Like this team, like this team may do it. You know what I mean? Like we got that defense is still really good. You got Randall, you got whatever. Like they pulled out. I think it was like 36-20 or something like that game, and it was just a great game, a great moment for the Eagles. And and then next week they play the Cowboys, and it was that's a different type of team there.
It was over. And now after the 92 season, free agency happens, and that team breaks up. Reggie goes, Keith Jackson. So many guys are gone after that, and that era of football really is officially over after that loss to Dallas. But we can be honest, that era of football really ended June 25th, 92 in Florida, when Jerome, and his nephew lost their life. Now, Jose, something that a lot of people have said to me when I was growing up, that obviously there's no way we'll ever know, but I find it interesting, is a lot of people have said if Jerome was still alive, Reggie White would not have gone to Green Bay. And by that, maybe not everybody, but other players maybe would have stayed in Philly. Do you think that to be true?
I think it's a good possibility of that happening, just because, like we talked about earlier, Jeremy, it's like that relationship. It was like a older brother, younger brother type of relationship, and not only like their relationship, like they have relationships with each other's families. Like Reggie would go down and hang out with Jerome's family, like we were talking about earlier. Like not even like for the camp, it was just like as a friendship. Jerome Brown would hang out with Reggie White and his wife at the time, and their family, and so I'm sure that Jerome would have had a big time say, and if Reggie was leaving. And again, because even with all of that being said, there's reports that Reggie White, if he was offered any type of deal by the Eagles, he would have signed it. And he wasn't even offered a contract by the Philadelphia Eagles, apparently. So I think. And I think if Reggie stays, a bunch of other, maybe Keith Jackson stays, I'm not sure. But, like it's a big what if for sure. And, or, how long does Jerome stay if Reggie leaves? You know what I mean? After that. And, if Jerome going down to Miami playing for the Dolphins or something like that, like, you know what I mean? Like it's a lot of what ifs and what could have happened. But I think if Jerome's here and plans to stay here, I think Reggie most likely will stay as well.
Do you think Jerome, if he would have lived longer, would he have been a Hall of Famer?
I absolutely think so. I mean, I know defensive tackle, it's one of those tough positions to get in the Hall of Fame. But if we can talk about legacy, right, and look at those defensive tackles that came out of Miami and all those great players like. I mentioned earlier, like Russell Maryland, Cortez Kennedy, then you got Warren Sapp after that. And we all know how great, Russell Maryland wasn't great like we thought he was going to be. Still a very solid player for a Super Bowl team. Cortez Kennedy was at one point the best defensive tackle in the NFL.
Yeah, he's a
Then
Hall of
obviously,
Famer.
yeah, he's a Hall of Famer, and we all know Warren Sapp's a Hall of Famer. And each and every one of them will say Jerome Brown was a much better player than I was. And I think we talked about impact, and obviously we're talking about, the University of Miami still. And I think the impact that Jerome had on those guys and having in that position, that it made that position sexy. You know what I mean? Like it made that playing defensive tackle for the University of Miami like a sexy position, like a quarterback or whatever the case. And even when Jerome passed, Cortez Kennedy changes his number to 99 for that season. And it's just like the respect that all these guys have for him. I think he would have been first ballot Hall of Famer. Like we're looking at a defensive tackle that's like changing the position. You know what I mean? Like right before our eyes, and is including a lot of speed and agility, but not only having that speed and agility, but definitely all the power that you need to play that position. So I just think that was a special, different type of player, and I think absolutely.
No, and I think you look at in the 80s with like the New York Jets, that sack exchange, and Mark Gastineau was getting to the quarterback and making noise and dancing. But you look at Gastineau's about 6'5", 275, very lean looking.
Yeah.
Kind of has that it's like Gold's Gym kind of body, right?
Yeah, that 80s body.
Yeah. But I don't know of a D tackle. Jerome, think Warren Sapp, really.
Right.
Or, if for those who don't know, or he had that kind of build, and to see a player on defense get to the quarterback like that, and then to be so expressive and celebratory, I think he was the first like that. Like as far as not the first great D tackle to rush the passer.
Yeah.
But
that build, that
mold of like celebrating, making it like he gets a sack, he's going to be dancing, making moves. And he's
doing
a big,
salute.
Yeah, he's a big, heavier. Yeah, he's a heavy set guy. We see that now. Sapp did it, and now now that's just like common ground. Like we're just used to that. But you weren't seeing that, in my opinion. If I'm wrong, let me know. But I've been thinking about it, and looked like Jerome was the one to really start that. And Warren Sapp talks all the time about the influence that Jerome had on his career, and that his first game of his career was at the Eagles. He got his first sack at the Vet, when he's with Tampa Bay, and he talked about when people were talking about, oh, do you hate coming to the Vet? He goes, no, I got my first sack there. He's like, that's where Jerome Brown played. I remember him always as Jerome Brown played here, so I can't hate it. The impact that Jerome just carried on, and you said it great, like from Russell to Cortez Kennedy to Sapp. And I'll go. Let's be real. People are comparing who's the D tackle I'm hearing the most, and people say greatest D tackle ever. The combo I'm hearing, rightfully or wrong, I think that should not be it. But you're hearing Aaron Donald compared to Warren Sapp.
Yeah.
And Sapp is Jerome Brown 2.0 in every way, honestly. Not just like on the field, but personality, loud, brash. Like Warren Sapp's like a Jerome Brown Jr. almost. And I do think, like you said, like he would have been a first ballot Hall of Famer. And I wonder, and I think the conversations about Aaron Donald after the Super Bowl and stuff, I'm not going to lie, throughout I've thought about Jerome, and just if he would have lived, would we be saying that about him? Would we be throwing his name in there, as is it Aaron Donald or Warren Sapp? Or what about Aaron Donald, Warren Sapp, or Jerome Brown? Like, would we have been doing that? Like, it's one of those what ifs that we'll never know.
Right. I mean, we've had John Randall. You know what I mean? Like, there's so many great defensive tackles, especially like that come after this era of football, in the NFL. But yeah, I think, again, we were talking about it earlier, 29 and a half sacks in roughly 4 seasons at that point. You know what I mean? Like you add another 8 more seasons to that. Like I just think, it's a Hall of Fame resume. He's already in 4 seasons, let's just say, already 2 first-team All-Pros, 2 Pro Bowls. It's just the league is already starting to recognize it. This would have been a perennial Pro Bowl player every season. It was just, and then playing with Reggie, he may not get that double team that a lot of these other great players are getting, so he has more of an opportunity. And then now we're talking about the evolution of the NFL as well. So now these teams are going to start throwing more, and now he's going to have even more opportunities to rush the passer. So it's like you just add all that up, and you're going to see these numbers kind of like just keep evolving as the player is going to evolve. Again, he's not even entering his prime yet. So it's just, I think it's without a doubt. And again, like, you can take our opinions on it, fine, or not take them. That's perfectly fine. But again, like, look up what Jeremy was talking about, and how some of these players, especially the defensive linemen, defensive tackles, talked about Jerome Brown. Like they're like being like before them and stuff like that. You'll see we're not the only ones with that same opinion, and we're talking about all-time great players as well.
So I think it's important that it's not just. I think a lot of people can look at it as it's a local story. It's a local story for just Philadelphia, or if you want to say for Miami or Brooksville even, Jerome Brown.
Right.
And he definitely is. He affected those cities directly in a lot of ways. But to me, nationally, he's a part of how the sports culture changed. And I don't think people connect those dots a lot of times, that the franchises, the era, who he was, the way sports and culture have merged, and we're still seeing it 35 years later. Jerome Brown's at the forefront of that, and people aren't like putting that together. It's like, oh, coincidence that he was here. Coincidence he was there. It's just a coincidence he was like, this D tackle who was loud and brash and getting sacks and dancing. Like, yeah, we're still seeing that happen in sports and in football to this day. We're still seeing now. It's no big deal. Everybody, it's almost like swag is almost like played out. Every kid, every college team. Sometimes I'm wondering, I'm like, yo, you're like 5 and 8. I'm looking at a basketball team. I go, well, what do you have to be bragging about? So we're just used to it. It just always happens. But it wasn't like that until you had a guy like, and he had others too. He had other teammates, especially in Miami and even in Philly for sure. He had other teammates, but they followed his lead. And he was the guy on national TV. Because it's easy to do it. Let's be real, Jose. Behind closed doors, in practice, you're talking, just to the local media, whatever. But we're talking about on the grand stage. We talked about that Oklahoma game where that's the game of the week. How many game of the weeks had Miami had at that point?
At that point, right? Not too many.
And Brent Musburger, and then you're mic'd up. The camera's there, and you're calling the other team a bitch, and we ain't scared of you. We gonna hit you.
And who he was talking to? You know what I mean? Like, he was talking to Brian Bosworth, who was like everything. And he had his issues with the media too, but that was later on at the end of that tenure. But Boz was everywhere. He was one of the most famous athletes overall in American sports, and they're literally chomping him in front of America and just making that statement that the U is here. You know what I mean? We're going to take over college football.
It's important just to see that. It's important to see that the fatigues, that the nation saw that. The nation saw that. Like, it's important that has lasted in our minds and in our culture to this day. And that's Jerome Brown. And that's a legacy that he leaves beyond just tragically dying young, which is the first thing people think about, is one of those popular athletes gone too soon. Just beyond just being, he was a really good player, is he helped change the sports landscape. And we need to remember that. And that's why this is not just a Philadelphia story. This is it's a national thing. And it should be remembered on a bigger scale, that we think about, we lost Jerome Brown 30 years ago, but he changed the way we look at sports. And I'm forever grateful for that.
Right. And again, if you say you're not fortunate enough to have, to live in Philadelphia and stuff like that, like we are, and you'll go to Eagles games, you'll see hundreds of Jerome Brown jerseys. People still wear those jerseys. You look at guys. We talked about Aaron Donald, number 99, Warren Sapp, number 99. It's like the first time, anytime I see that number, the first player I think about is Jerome Brown. And again, we're talking 30 years later. Like that number, I feel like means something, and I feel like that's why certain players will wear that number. You go even when this tragedy happened, and you can go years after in Eagles games, you see banners hanging, on the sides of the stadium with Jerome Brown, number 99 or whatever, or bring it home for Jerome, or the JB sign, like that's the patch that's on the jerseys. It's just like, I can't remember, like I know we've lost a lot of like athletes throughout the years tragically. And I know in Philly we had Pelly Lindbergh, a little bit right before this time, or right around this same, well, before his passing, obviously. This was in the 80s. Petty Lindbergh was a goalie for the Flyers, who was a young, outstanding goaltender. He was going to be a great player, and he tragically passed away the same way in a car accident, But for me, in my lifetime, like there's nothing else that can compare to this. Because again, even to this day, I'll watch it and I still get like the hairs on my arm stand up, because I still feel terrible. You know what I mean? Because it was such a tragedy in the middle of, like, again, such a promising career that you can see it was promising. You knew it was going to be great for years and years and years, and we got robbed of that. But again, that's the reason why. I always say, man, things happen for a reason, and we don't know the reason. You know what I'm saying? I don't know the reason for sure, and it's just, again, like sometimes in sports and life, this stuff like this happens. So, again, the legacy he leaves, though, will live on forever. I know in Philly, it definitely will.
Yeah.
When we talk about some of the greatest players, people talk about Jerome Brown still.
And I look at it, just real quick, you said Pele Lindbergh from Philly in 85 or 86. That, we have Hank Gathers in 1990,
Right.
Philly native, and that was a tragic. So, that's 2 years before. So, yeah, that was a time of just young tragedies happen to these athletes in Philly. But, Jose, I'm glad we did this,
Yeah.
and in our way to pay respect to someone who has a lot of impact on a lot of people, whether they know it or not. But definitely, I know on you and on me too. And, R.I.P. Jerome, bring it home for Jerome. Those things that always stick with me.
Yeah.
And I say them all the time, almost just like without thinking.
I still can remember the song, like the
Yeah.
hook to the song. They came out with a song, if you're not familiar, in 92 with Bring It Home for, like, before the season. It was just to Bring It Home for Jerome. Like,
Mhm.
and it was just super catchy. Everybody in the city knew it, And again, if you were too young to even like experience that time, and the dude changed the defensive tackle position to what we know what it is now, and it's like more of like a pass rush, position. And it wasn't, at that point, it was like stuff to run, and if you can get to the quarterback, good. If not, all right, like just make sure you stop in the run. He came in and changed that whole thing and made it an important position at the time where it was not. So look it up, check out the stats. Like you'll be very impressed.
And if you, have any memories of Jerome or have anything you want to talk about, please, you can hit us up at Twitter at Bigger Game Pod, on Instagram at Bigger Game Pod, and you can even, comment, check out the YouTube channel, Bigger Than the Game with Jeremy and Jose. And also for podcasts, Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen, Google, please subscribe, like, comment. But, thank you, Jose, for doing this episode with me. It's a special one. So for the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Jose Ruiz, I'm Jeremy Dove. Thank you guys for listening to Bigger Than the Game with Jeremy and Jose.
Peace.